Hi guys, let's go watching. Just before that, subscribe and enjoy yourself. The girl dropped her phone and shook with anger, shouting that this could not have happened, so loudly that she could be heard from outside the house. In the background, there was a show featuring two students at school, and the heroine said that she had only one hobby. On TV, one girl asked the other whether she should learn to cook, but the main character didn't watch it. She was on her phone and reading novels, which was her hobby. But she was a huge fan of the novel called Goddess of Empire. But there were certain nuances that made her phone quickly go to the floor. The girl was shaking, crying, angry, and did not want to believe what she had read, blaming the author. The story began with a short story about a girl named Lillian, who was running somewhere and was a beautiful brunette. She was choosing between two guys until the last moment, not knowing which one to choose. As a result, in the end, she hugged the young man who became the emperor, and she met her happy ending with him. The problem was that the second character could not accept and let go of his love, looking sadly in their direction. This was our heroine's favorite character, and she called him Rayon. But in the end, he died defending Lillian. Returning to the present, the girl clenched her hands into fists, angry that her favorite character didn't even have her own storyline. She looked at his mention in the text alone many times, crying in bed, and wrote dozens of comments asking me to make a storyline for him. The girl was very upset and knew that this would not change anything, because after the ending, which many people did not like, the author simply disappeared. At first, she twisted in the robe, but then threw it away, thinking that she would like to receive Raonim herself. The heroine turned around and looked at her poster with the hero and did not understand how a guy who was a swordmaster could die so easily. She closed her eyes, wondering what it would be like to be his wife, and began to dream about how she would be in that story and how her son would call out to her, Tion's name and how she would hug the boy. And then Rayon would call her over with a smile, extending his hand to her. The girl was lying in bed all red when she was asked what was for dinner. She liked to dream about it, but she sighed heavily, knowing that it was impossible, and curled up with sadness. She wanted to be in a novel and meet her favorite character in person. The heroine didn't even care who she was there, whether she was the villain who tormented Lillian or one of the extras. However, she would still like to look good there and have a pretty face. She started to get out of bed and thought about going to the store. When she left the house, she realized that it was raining heavily outside and she regretted her decision to go out, and there were no people around. The girl was walking under an umbrella, having a bad feeling about it all, when she suddenly heard a noise near her and got scared. She stopped to look across the street, but she was struck by lightning, and everything began to blur before her eyes. The girl suddenly stood up and sat down abruptly on the bed. Now she looked different and had red hair. She looked at her palms in disbelief, and then at the room she was in, which was a luxurious and spacious room. The heroine remembered being struck by lightning, but did not understand what happened after that, thinking it was just a dream, and the maid looked at her uneasily. The woman asked if the heroine was okay, and the red-haired girl noticed her only now and realized that she was a maid. She crawled up the bed closer to the nervous woman to get a closer look at her and began to recognize her current environment. The heroine was very surprised to realize that the maid's uniform was the same as described in the novel. But she also saw that the woman was trembling, but she did not understand why. Thinking that it might be a dream, she poked her finger into the maid's face and felt the soft cheek as if it were real. The woman did not understand why the girl did it, and did not really understand what was happening. She realized something and immediately got up, running to the mirror while the maid tried to stop her, saying that the lady was not yet well. She began to realize that it was not a dream. She was delighted and exclaimed that it was incredible, but in such a way that the maid did not understand what she said. She was looking at her reflection, her eyes were purple, and the maid came in behind her and looked at her in surprise, worried about the girl while she was in a frenzy of excitement. The girl turned away from the mirror and answered affirmatively that everything was fine and asked with a smile if the maid thought the same. The heroine looked at herself in the mirror, singing and touching her face, until the maid stood confidently not far away. The girl felt and understood everything, so she came to the conclusion that she had been reborn, but she was not against it. She was even very much in favor of it. Suddenly, she wondered which of the characters in the story had crimson hair, and she dropped her mirror in realization. The girl called the maid, who was in a noticeably sadder mood, and the woman was frightened when she heard the question about the heroine's name. She nervously replied that the girl's name was Istina Drino von Rassia, as if the heroine had been struck by lightning again. The crimson-haired girl frowned, thinking that in the past she would have been happy to be anyone in this story. But she wasn't happy about becoming a heroine, a princess who mocked Rayon Nim. She panicked. Next, the main character tells us a little more about the plot of the Goddess of Empire. There were 4 main beauties in the academy where the main events took place, and Lillian, who moved here from North Korea, wanted to win them all over. The heroine considered that girl to be a simple heartthrob, but despite this, she greatly influenced the development and influence of young men in the Empire, and one of them was her favorite character, the master of the abyssal sword. With the name Rayon de Lyon, he had a dark past. He was the eldest son of an almost impoverished count, and he was abused while growing up. However, later the boy met his mentor, who taught him to fight and turned him into a sword master. Then he perfectly learned to control strong, higher magic, and even the great sage recognized him. But as a result, the young man became a strong and cunning munchkin who restored his family, from which he had previously left. But even such a strong hero could not escape the girl's charms and fell in love with her. The two met at the academy when Rayon was helping a girl pick up papers and they touched hands. But as if in a cliché, they often ran into each other by chance, and so unnoticed he became interested in Liana. So he became a knight who always protected her and was always ready for battle. The guy became known as an unrequitedly in love, passionate character. But then the guy who was also called everyone's first love. He died defending the girl. Returning to the present, the heroine asked the maid how old she was, and she was surprised to hear that she was 12. And then the girl decided to ask about her illness, to which the woman replied that the heroine had become ill at a horseback riding competition and had fallen off the horse, although the horse looked happy with what it had done. She was told that she had been lying there for a long time, and the girl hoped that the horse had not thrown her off because of the girl's rude attitude. Then we were told that Istina was the only daughter of the Razi family. Her parents, Duke Benzes and his wife Serendi, loved her very much, so she grew up in love and care from them. But the girl was not similar in character and was the complete opposite of her good-natured parents. One could even doubt that she was their daughter. She was a bomb and a hurricane for her family and a bully. The girl threw the poor white-haired boy to the ground. She looked down on him, and she was one of those who mocked Rayon the most. The girl exhaled heavily, upset by her choice of fate. But now she realized that her heroine was a terrible person, and that's why the maid was shaking, even from the girl's simple gaze. So the crimson-haired girl smiled kindly and said that the woman could be free, and received gratitude in return. The girl fell on the bed trying to remember the plot of the story. She recalled reading in the past that her character had injured herself while riding a horse, but then thought it was karma. The girl lay looking at the ceiling, thinking that Rayon Nim hates her, as it was in the original. The heroine reflected on the characters who died after the fall and recalled how outraged she was to read in a novel that Truth woke up and met Rayon a month later. After this part, she stood up abruptly, blushed, and hugged her pillow, remembering that after the heroine of the story woke up, her father forbade anyone to come to her. But a month passed and the girl was red and very happy. She was glowing with joy because her favorite hero had arrived. She remembered that he had arrived with a count who wanted to suck up to the Duke. It was their first meeting after 2 years of not seeing each other, and the heroine was hitting the pillow with her hands. She was very worried that he hated her, but she was going to meet him, and suddenly her eyes lit up and she had a plan that she was going to execute. Truth was in the courtyard and greeted the butler, maid, and knights with a big smile. The first 2 were nervous but didn't say anything. The knight shivered and greeted back. Although it's been a month since she behaved well, people's attitudes toward her have not changed, and she will have a long way to go to clean up her reputation so that people stop being afraid of her. Her father called out to her, so she turned to him. The man called her over with a sincere smile and open arms. She quickly ran up and hugged him, and he had to bend a little to do so. He noticed that the girl was particularly happy and beautiful today, and she replied that it was because they were going to have guests. And, of course, because Rayon was due to arrive. And then the Duke was told that the Count had already arrived, and the girl was looking happily at the entrance, holding her dress. Holding their father's hand, they stood at the gate waiting for the guests to arrive. The man and the boy entered, and the girl still could not believe before her death that she would be able to see Rayon as a child. The girl blushed when she noticed that the boy was literally shining and shining. The boy had a serious expression on his face, and she was a little worried because they met eyes. Deciding to lighten the mood, she awkwardly greeted him, a little surprised that he looked like that. The young man remained silent and had a mad and frowning expression on his face. She did not blame him for this, saying that he had suffered a lot from the truth. She thought he was handsome, even when he was angry, and was a little frightened when she heard the Count's voice. He was yelling at the boy, throwing his head back and calling him a puppy, while the girl stood by and watched. The man complained that the lady said hello to him, but he didn't answer and was frowning, and the girl started to get angry. The Count began to apologize for the boy, explaining that his son had no manners since childhood, and the girl said it was insolent. She pointed her finger at him and started screaming about how he dared to hit her precious boyfriend, who for a moment had no emotions on his face at all at that moment. The girl looked frightened and asked if the man hadn't put too much faith in his luck when he did it. But she did it in her mind, and in reality she smiled with a grim expression while the man continued to argue that his son had offended the girl. The two continued to quarrel, and Estina decided she was tired of it and pretended to faint while falling on her father. Her father was seriously scared and started asking her what was wrong. He caught her in a panic, saying that he knew she was not yet fully healthy. The girl began to cry and complain to him that the Count scared her very much. The man began to calm her down and asked that the Count not quarrel in front of her anymore, and the Count agreed, a little unsure of the situation, rubbing his butt. Truth smiled, glad that her plan had worked, and the young man in her dreams also realized that she had helped him and thanked her with a smile. She hoped that their relationship would improve now, but in reality the boy's expression did not change at all. Benzies asked her if she was okay, and she said yes, thinking that it was understandable that it would be strange if a guy who had been bullied for a long time would change like that. Truth reached out to him, hopeful, wanting to believe in the best. He looked at her hand in silence and then took a step back from her. A little disappointed, she withdrew her hand, but she wasn't going to give up, so she turned to him while he looked at her in surprise. The girl offered to go play in her room. He turned his head, nervous. He didn't want to go. He was scared. The heroine did not understand why he had such a reaction, why he was so frightened. She came to the conclusion that it was because of her evil smirk, and she cursed her. But despite this, the guy still went with her to her room and exhaled heavily. Estina still didn't believe she was with her favorite character, but you took him by the hand and invited him to sit on her bed. When she tried to move him, she failed, and the guy himself was in no hurry to move either. Looking at his arms with wounds, the girl remembered that she had read that he had been fencing since childhood. The young man finally spoke, asking if she really wanted him to sit down. She hugged his hand and beamed. When she heard his voice, she was surprised that he was only 12, because even now his voice drove her crazy. Rayon quickly took his hand away from her and sat down on the bed. Right behind him, Truth sat down a little further away. After that, the guy was silent all the time and didn't even look in her direction and tried to ignore her, and she didn't like it. The girl wanted him to look at her and looked down at her dress while he looked the other way from her. Estina asked him if he was surprised by the changes in her since their last meeting, but he didn't answer and didn't even turn to her. She had only one option left, and that was to cry, but even though she tried, she failed. So she decided to ask him if he knew that the girl had fallen off her horse and that she had been dreaming a lot while she was unconscious. She repented, saying she was sorry for the way she had treated him, and the guy finally looked at her. The girl said that this would not happen again and that she understood that it was hard for him to look at her, but then he interrupted her, which surprised her. Rayon did not look at her again and simply asked if that was all she wanted to say, and then he said that he'd better go and stood up, and she went up after him and grabbed his arm, and the guy asked why. The girl began to beg him strongly not to leave, but to wait a little longer and asked him to finally look at her. Holding on tightly and not letting go, she begged him to look at least once. She realized that it sounded strange, but she didn't care. He thought for a minute, took his hand away from her and looked at her, asking if that was enough for her. The girl looked at him in love and admiration with her hands locked together. She blushed and hid her face in the hope that he wouldn't see her smiling, and he looked in her direction with a questioning look. Estina took a breath, folded her arms and looked sincerely at the boy, saying that she would not offend him. He asked her what she was doing, and she frowned a bit and replied that she was apologizing to him, and he said he accepted and walked toward the exit, but she heard that he did not sound sincere. She was angry and upset, but later pulled herself together. Thinking about the fact that she had mocked him every time before and told him to die, it is clear that he did not like her and was afraid of her. And if he had forgiven her so easily and befriended her right after everything that had happened before, it would have been incredibly strange. She fell on the bed and considered running after him and trying to grab him again. The girl lay there and quickly came to the conclusion that he would hate her even more then. But she didn't know what to do, because their next meeting was to take place in 2 years. The heroine did not plan to wait that long and tried to force herself to remember anything that could help her with this. Istina remembered something and now had an idea of how she could meet the guy sooner. She was in a panic and shouted that she didn't know, and her maid asked what she was talking about. The woman did not receive a proper explanation, but only a shout with the same words, and asked again what the girl was talking about. In fact, she was desperate because she realized that she did not know where Rayon was training in fencing. The short story simply described that from the age of 7, he would wake up alone and go to the mountain to train, where he would train in a secret place with his mentor until he entered the academy. She had read it once back in the normal world, thinking about how persistent he had been since childhood and that it sounded like something he would do. The story said that he trained on a high mountain and that among the 5 states, Germain was the largest and strongest of them, and its capital was the city of Chadia. Another problem was that there were incredibly many mountains. That's why the girl panicked, not knowing how to find the guy in such a big place, while the maid looked at her with a questioning look. Istina thought that if he was going there early, it shouldn't be too far from Chadia, where they both lived, and she looked at the map while the maid looked at the heroine with interest. She thought that she would have to look at every mountain, and the woman said that it was better for the girl not to stand on a huge stack of books, because she could get hurt. Suddenly, the heroine turned to the maid with her hands at her sides and asked her if she knew a high mountain where she could practice fencing, and she replied that she did not know, but that knights should. The girl lit up, thanked him, and ran happily toward the exit. But before she left, she looked back at the woman and asked her name, who was holding a book, and replied that her name was Betty. Istina thanked her once again, calling her by name, which surprised her, thinking that something serious must have happened. She ran through everyone and eventually reached her father's office, who was working on papers at the time, and called out to him. He looked up and was very happy when he realized it was her and was glad to see her. After she heard about the barracks with the knights, the girl immediately remembered one person who was just approaching him. He was barely mentioned in the novel, and even during the collapse of the Rasia family, he defended them to the end. He was their most loyal knight. The girl stood in front of him while the other knights also looked at the two. It was a brown-haired young man, the Wind Knight Lord Reard. She asked the guy to bend over a little bit, and he was a little surprised, but agreed. He knelt down, and the girl began to whisper something to him, while everyone else looked on with interest. The young man was in a bit of a dark mood, but the girl was glowing and said that it would be better for them to talk separately later. The guy turned a little nervously in the other direction and apologized, and the girl didn't understand why at first. But he quickly realized that she had smiled again, startling him. But after that, he said that it would not be possible to talk about it in secret, and the girl was a little unhappy about it and asked why. He replied that it was because of the Duke's order, and the girl turned blue at this information. The young man explained that it was to keep her safe. He continued that they would not be able to leave secretly, and then asked if she had come here on her own. But the girl was nervous and said that she had received permission. She realized that she was very wrong. 10 minutes ago, when she was at her father's house, he happily asked her what the girl had come for. Truth beamed and said with a smile that she would like to go to the barracks. The man smiled back and said that it was a good idea, but that she shouldn't intimidate the knights with a knife like last time, although he added that if she still wanted to, she could do whatever she wanted. Truth agreed, and was surprised that he said it with a smile, thinking that the Duke was a little out of his mind. Now back at the hotel, the girl invited the knight to go to her room, then to the living room for tea, but he disagreed and said he would not go. Then the heroine got angry and began to threaten the boy that she would come to them every day and torment all the knights. After looking at the knights for a while, he began to speak, and the girl was already excited. The guy said that they wouldn't be able to do it secretly anyway, and the girl was immediately disappointed. She replied that she understood and invited him to go to the garden with her, and he was a little scared. They both went to the garden, and the boy asked her if she really wanted him to look for a high mountain with her, just the two of them, and the girl confirmed. Word turned away from the offended woman and said that he could not agree to this. But then I looked at the offended lady and asked her why she needed it. She replied thoughtfully that she had a person she had to find, but that she could only ask him for help. Truth asked not to ask why, because she simply trusted him the most and that she would only be able to find meaning in everything when she found it. And she thought about Rayon. She continued that if he didn't agree, she might drop the idea, but she was still asking for help. She was shaking as she said it. The knight thought about it and exhaled heavily, said he understood her, and she looked at him. He said he needed time to think about it, but the girl was already happy about it. She jumped up with her hands in the air and gave him time to think. 2 days passed, and a girl who was in her room was approached by Reard and told that he had come to take her to a high mountain and bowed down. Istina smiled and said that she was ready to go. They had been climbing the high mountains of Chadia for 5 days, along with a map. In total, there were 9 mountains, but they went around 7 of them and they turned out to be the wrong ones. She also had very shaky legs because of all the walking. After climbing another mountain, she sighed, saying that this mountain was not the one she needed either. Suddenly, he looked back and said that there was someone in one direction. Suddenly, another boy began to attack Reard with lightning speed, while the girl stood behind the knight. They were asked who they were, and then the girl remembered whose voice it was and blushed a little. She knew it was Rayon and that she had finally found him. He looked at her, and she was beaming and smiling, saying that she was glad they could meet again after a long time apart. The boy went down to the ground and hid his sword, recognizing her as well, while the knight stood there at a loss as to what to do. Istina began to tell him that she was just walking around and how lucky they had met, and asked if he was fencing here. The young man was not very happy to see her again. Nervously, she asked if he was preparing for the academy. He didn't answer anything, but said he had questions for her, and the girl replied that he could ask anything. Rayon folded his arms and asked how it was that she, who had been mocking him, decided to come to him in person and wondered why. The knight began to draw his sword, saying that the young man was too rude to the princess. However, the girl stopped him, saying that Rayon was her friend, the son of a count, and he could be trusted. Since childhood, Istina abused him, made the maids beat him, tripped him up, and forced him to eat poisoned food against his will. She realized that he was disgusted to see her now, but she offered a deal in which she would not tell the count about this place. He told her to continue, and she said that in exchange for silence, she also wanted to train in fencing there. The young man gripped his weapon tighter, and she was sure that she would be practicing with him here anyway, because she wanted to be closer to him. He agreed, and later, when he was training, she would sit on the side and watch him and praise him. But Reed came up to her and said it was time for her to train. Truth stood up abruptly and asked if the 5 minutes of rest had already passed and how many strokes she would now need to deliver, and the man replied that 20. As she began to warm up, she realized that tomorrow she would be sore, but she didn't want to appear weak in front of Rayon, so she didn't give up. He would sometimes look at the girl, but after a while she got tired and asked if she could take a break by sitting on the bedspread. A young man also sat down next to her, and she decided that this was her chance. Istina moved a little closer and nervously handed him the sandwiches she had prepared for him. In fact, she woke Betty up early and asked her to cook them, and she supported her morally. She also called them love sandwiches herself. He looked at them incredulously and asked what she had put in it again, and she almost took offense. She quickly replied that he could safely eat them and that she hadn't added any poison or frogs. To convince him, she tried one right in front of him and looked like a hamster. Rayon didn't believe her, saying that she must be immune. But the girl stood up and said that they had already made up, and that she had already told him that she was no longer doing this. He said that she remembered something like that and turned around, and she understood why he was angry, but she had promised him that she wouldn't do anything bad. But as a result, she threatened him with a count, and now she is reproaching herself for this act, thinking that it was low. His family, the Rayons, had many debts and were only apparently rich. The count had no strength, and his wife supported him. But later, she could not stand it and committed suicide. Therefore, the madman was left with only a son whose beauty was envied by many. And to look good in front of other aristocrats, the boy was raised like a valuable toy. If he found out that the boy was training, he would probably lock him in a dungeon, and the girl would realize that he hated her for threatening him like that, given that he was already taking a lot of risks. Truth didn't want to threaten him at all, but if she hadn't, he would have run away again. But she still felt guilty. Suddenly, a man stood over her and asked her to take one sandwich with a smile. At first, she didn't realize who it was, but Rayon quickly went up to the man, saying that it was his mentor. Then the girl understood everything and remembered that the novel did not describe him much, but he turned out to be very handsome, and the mentor began to ask the boy if he was lazy. The truth suddenly spoke to me, and I wondered how Rayon could be lazy if he was the most persistent and worked the hardest. They both looked at her strangely and were silent. The man asked the younger man if it was spring in his life and was shining, while the boy turned dark and sarcastically replied that it was a good joke. The mentor sat down and asked again if he could have a sandwich, and the girl answered in the affirmative, saying that he could have all of them except the ones specially for Rayon. He thanked him and called the boy to join him, who agreed and also sat down. Now those who were not supposed to be allies formed their own group of 4, Truth, Rayon, the mentor, and Rerd. She sat there red-faced, watching the boy eat and admiring him. Every day, she and Betty practiced cooking them according to her recipe, and the maid would help if needed. After that, he ate them from her every day, following the promise he made to his mentor. But he still hardly ate, and she didn't like that in the novel. Because of the trauma of his childhood, he had a poor sense of taste and mostly only picked and ate vegetables. Although they were the same age, he was much smaller than she was. But still, after training and everything, he was able to become a munchkin, so soon he will be much taller and bigger than her. However, the girl wanted the boy to love food, because there are so many delicious things in the world, and it would be sad not to enjoy them. So she decided that if she cooked well, she might be able to make him love her. But she watched him start to eat and told him in the voice that it was cute. The guy put the food to his mouth, but then said that he wouldn't say it wasn't good, but he wasn't hungry right now and dropped the sandwich. Truth quickly regretted what she had said, but it was too late, and the young man had already gotten up and left. Over the past few weeks, her fencing skills have improved significantly, and she has found it easier to wake up in the morning, and her cooking skills have improved. Rayon also received advice from a mentor and grew significantly in his skills. The mentor's name was Lucas, but since the heroine rarely saw him, she knew nothing more about him than his name. But despite this and her thoughts that she was quite fit, one day she got sick, so she was in bed and her mother and Betty took care of her. At first she felt cold, then her images began to blur and she started to faint. In general, the girl was born into a simple family and was an ordinary high school student who lived a simple life. In her family, it was hard to even have dinner together, and they hardly spoke to each other, and she generally left the house quickly. She was often lonely and sad, so on the advice of her friends, she started reading light romantic fantasy. However, out of the many characters from different works, only Rayon took her fancy. Istina immediately fell in love with him and wanted to meet him more and just look at him. But after she was struck by lightning and died, everything seemed meaningless. She thought that now she would not be able to dream about Rayon. After realizing that she had been reborn, she gained hope, because the moment she had been waiting for had come. She had neither thoughts nor desires to go back, because she had the opportunity to meet the hero she had wanted to see for so long, because she considered him her everything, almost her reason for living. Lying on her bed, Istina turned to her mother and maid and asked them to cure her as soon as possible. She hugged her mother and wanted to get better so she could make bread in the morning and meet her boyfriend again. The next day, she got ready to leave, but the knight stopped her because the Duchess told her not to go out today. The girl started to argue and say that she was fine, but she got up early and even baked bread herself. She asked what she should do then, and if she was not released, would she go to the knights, and was told that she could not do that anyway. Istina began to threaten that if she was not released, she would go torment all the servants and force them to leave the house. He was frightened and said he would go ask the Duchess. When he returned, he said that her mother had allowed her to go, but that she would not be allowed to train, and she said that it was not right for her. He was surprised and asked why she didn't like it. The girl replied that then Rayon would know that she was sick, and she did not want that. The boy sighed heavily and said that it was impossible to talk her out of something if she wanted to do it. She was pleased with her actions and the result, and that she would not interfere with his training. The young man did not speak to her. She was not surprised, but she was sad that he treated her like a ghost. Istina got up and started preparing for the training, asking how many strokes they needed to do, and was told that they would start with 10. She turned to him with a smile and said that it was too easy and that she would do 200. The heroine thought she could show her power, but the vision in her eyes began to blur and double, and at first she tried to dismiss it as a joke about magic. The girl thought about not being a burden to the boy, but her body did not listen to her. In her mind, she panicked, wondering why this was happening now, when she was near Rayon. After some time, she regained consciousness and began to feel something warm. She thought that Reed had run up to her and caught her and thanked her. In fact, it was Rayon who told her that she should stop training for the day, because it would be bad if something happened to her. The young man was surprised that, in such a state, she came anyway. In her thoughts, she said that she loved him too much, but in words, she said that she just wanted to see him again. She could smell a sweet odor and realized that it was coming from him. She also realized that he was carrying her on his back, so she decided that it was definitely a dream. So she started talking, thinking it was a dream and she could say whatever she wanted. She said that she would always be with him, whether it was reality or a dream, anytime, any day, anywhere. Truth was running somewhere, simultaneously urging Weird to follow her quickly, and he told her to be careful not to fall. The girl replied that she didn't see a problem with getting up and running again, so they had to hurry, but he kept stopping her, saying that they should talk first. She smiled and said she didn't have time to talk, because she hadn't seen Rayon for 3 days and she didn't understand why. Truth finally came running and greeted the boy and Lucas happily, one as gloomy as ever and the other cheerful. Now she was healthy, so the stick became very easy for her again as usual. The heroine noticed that the boy was practicing especially hard today while she was looking at him with heartfelt eyes, hiding behind a tree. After that, she trained and had the idea to have a secret picnic. The girl was laying out plates and food, but suddenly looked at her hands and noticed that her nails were rough and her hands looked unkempt. She thought that if Betty saw this, she would scold her, saying that sophistication was the most important thing for an aristocrat. Istina was picking at her nails when Rayon came up behind her with a dark expression and asked what she was doing. And then I asked her if she was putting her fingernail in the sandwich, and she quickly protested, saying that she was not, and that she no longer did that. In the meantime, Lucas and Reed had already come over, and the former wished everyone a good meal with a smile. She was glad that he would no longer be able to ask such questions, so she also wished everyone a good meal. Lucas approached her again and asked if she would be free later, because he and his younger son wanted to go out. She happily agreed because she would always have free time to spend with Rayon. He said with a sly smile that they wanted to go eat meat, but the girl was probably already full of sandwiches, and she started to object, saying that she could eat everything. After that, the man laughed hard at her answer and she thought he was pissing her off. All 4 of them came to the place where Lucas had led them. They went in and he said that they would eat here, but the girl was worried because her peer hardly ate meat. So now she is thinking about adding some meat to her breakfast for him. The boy's mentor was good at reading people, so he called Nightward over and told him that they should leave the 2 of them alone. So they both went outside, leaving the children inside, and Istina was very grateful to him for that. She beamed, thinking this was a good chance to get closer to each other, and they sat next to each other and remained silent for the time being. They were sitting by the fireplace, and she moved closer to him. He didn't react, and she was already happy that he didn't run away. Even just sitting with him, even the world seemed brighter and happier to her. Suddenly, he looked in her direction and asked her why she had started fencing. The heroine laughed a little while the guy looked at her with a question and asked why he had decided to ask so suddenly. But almost immediately she answered that it was because she had a person she wanted to protect, and he looked at her with a lot of doubt. She wanted to protect him even with all the training, but everything has a limit. But she definitely didn't want to be a burden to him. She sat sadly remembering that in the novel he died defending Liana. And if this time he was in danger again because of her, she would kill her with her own hands. But immediately after that, she trembled, frightened that she was having cruel thoughts. She told the guy that she didn't care about gender and status, so she decided that why not try it, because with fencing she could protect herself and her loved ones. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and immediately realized why all stories describe the character's eyes in detail. Truth blushed and clutched her heart, thinking that her heart was about to burst. She started to say that she would like to take them back, but quickly closed her mouth and fell silent. The guy looked at her with some disgust, and she started to make excuses. She said that she didn't mean anything at all and he just misunderstood. The girl cursed herself again for saying it out loud. She became ashamed and started to mix her hair, thinking that it was easier to die at that moment. The guy finally spoke again and said that if she really wanted to own a sword, that was commendable. Estina calmed down and was surprised by his words. She had not expected them. He turned away a little, and the girl glowed with happiness that he had praised her, and they sat in front of the fire. Later, Lucas and Reard returned with food, so now all four were sitting at the table by the fireplace. The mentor turned to the girl and asked if she had already thanked Rayon, because she did not understand what she had to thank him for. He reminded her of the day she fell and that the boy had carried her on his back, and that the knight had already thanked her, but still. The heroine blushed when she realized that it was not a dream, and thought that this was probably what the knight wanted to tell her while they were walking up the mountain. She was glowing with happiness and ran to the guy, knocking him over and making them both end up on the floor. The guy noticed that it was not very decent of her, and he blushed a little, but the girl replied that she didn't care, she didn't know anything, and thanked him, hugging him. Truth was smiling broadly, thinking that even if he pushed her away, she would not let him in, because she liked him very much. The older ones just sat there looking at them sweetly and did not interfere. The next time she greeted the frowning Rayon with a joyful greeting, he quickly turned away from her and remained silent. Then he got up and walked away, but the heroine didn't give up and followed him, asking why he was ignoring and avoiding her. The young man was angry and asked why he should greet her at all, and she was not sure because they were friends. Clenching his fist, he asked her if she was serious, and she answered in the affirmative. Rayon said he didn't want to see her anymore. She asked why. He told her to use her head and smiled evilly. He added that she probably didn't have a brain at all and that he wouldn't be of any help here. She remembered yesterday's hug and became sad, but she just liked him and didn't want to let him go. But after that day, he behaved the same way, asking her not to talk to him and avoiding her in every way, even insulting her by saying that she had a bucket on her head if she didn't understand the first time. The girl sat alone, sad but grateful for the short answers. Since at first he did not respond at all, it seemed like progress, and in any case, she was not going to give up. The maid gave her the cloak and asked her what she wanted to do with it, and she replied that it was nothing serious, just to take care of some business. She gladly took the cloak and recognized that it fit her. She had several goals, one of which was to get closer to Rayon, and the other was to get closer to the oracles and magicians who always appeared everywhere in the Manhwa. In this novel, it made her very angry when she read it. The fortune teller failed to choose the heroine's future husband and would have been better off saying that the crown prince was Lillian's destiny. Instead, he said she was a goddess and made her think which of the two to choose. The heroine blamed him for the death of the innocent Rayon. Just thinking about him made the girl angry. Estina wanted to prevent this from happening, so she took the coat, thanked Beta for it, saying she would be careful, said goodbye and ran off. She had a plan. Her plan failed as soon as she came to the knight, who rejected her right away. The girl's mood darkened a bit. She was tired of hearing him say that, and she asked him again. Truth pointed a finger at him and told him not to ask questions, but to do as she wanted, otherwise he knew what she would do to the other knights. After being silent for a moment, he said that he understood everything and seemed to have accepted his fate long ago. On the day, she said goodbye to Rayon and Lucas as usual, although she received a reply only from the latter. Estina and Reard looked at each other, and the next moment they were walking in their robes. They were in the capital of Chadia, where there were many different stalls and even more people around them. Then we entered a tavern filled with people. Of course, people were making a lot of noise, and it made the girl very happy, because that's what she wanted. Suddenly they asked her what she wanted, and she was a little nervous. She pushed the knight with her elbow, he coughed a little and began to speak, also nervously. That the owner didn't want to shed anyone's blood today, but if he brought some vegetables it would be nice. The girl just sat silently with her hands on the table. People were surprised and started looking back at their table. Truth rejoiced that the knight played well, and everything went according to her plan. They pretended to be talking about serious things, and Reard asked what the owner of Ruckton thought, and the girl who was him said that she couldn't say much, just a little. She continued that in 2 years, a woman blessed by the goddess would appear in the Empire of Germain, and her name would be Liliana. In the novel, there was a character called Ruckton who predicted the future by rumor and wore a blue cloak. Her goal was to find him and change his prediction. But since she was not the author, it was difficult to know where he would appear. So she decided to change the original script in advance, before Rukden spoke about the prophecy. Her plan was to be proactive. A few days later, he and Rayon finished training for the event. They identified 3 places where they made false predictions with a spear. For example, the fact that Lillian had brown hair, that she would appear at the academy, that she was the destiny of the crown prince and could not love anyone else but him. As they were leaving one of the places, they were suddenly called out. He was wearing a blue cloak, but he took off his cape and asked if they were the famous oracles of the rumors. The truth realized that the person it needed had come and was happy with it, but the other person was not so happy. The girl went on to say with a smile that she was the harbinger of Rukden. He looked at her sharply and asked if she could talk to him for a while, and Estina immediately agreed. The man told them to follow him, and the girl followed enthusiastically. She finally met the real Rukden, although she was a little scared, but also incredibly curious. They came to a rather large mansion surrounded by trees. But looking at the expression on the man's face, his character seemed even worse and nastier than in the novel, and she did not understand why. He slammed on the table and said that she should be responsible for her words, and if she just talked like that, he would kill her, and if she didn't answer, he would kill her too. Truth told Rerd, who started to pull out his weapon, to hide the sword and that she would answer all the man's questions. She realized that the man would still be stronger than both of them, so it wouldn't help. The first question was how she could prove that she was Rukden, and he asked it with his arms crossed. The girl began to think nervously about what she could tell him. He hurried her, saying that if she didn't answer quickly, he would kill her as well, so she began to tell him that she was Rukden, and that when she was 7 years old he peed in a blanket, and he had a birthmark on his buttocks, and in his teens he was weak, so he often had a runny nose. The man shouted sharply for her to stop, but not in a cultured way. Truth teased, thinking how good it was that she had read his story. Rukden was angry, and Reard was just uncomfortable. After this short break, the girl continued that in order to wait for his beloved Serena, he had made a deal with the Blue Dragon, and asked the shocked man if she had said everything correctly. Rukden has lived for thousands of years, and is closely associated with the legend of the creation of the Empire. 1,000 years ago, he met a girl from another dimension and fell head over heels in love with her. However, over time, she still returned to where she came from, and for the sake of his beloved, who would return, he made a deal with the dragon to extend his life. And even after thousands of years, the man is still waiting for her return. And that's why he got angry after she said that, because no one knew that about him, and no one could have known. The girl smiled to herself. Rukden quickly drew his sword and pointed it at the girl and the knight, and the two were surprised at his agility. Word said it was insolence, but Truth stopped him from acting on it by telling him that they would not win with their strength. In the novel, this man was the closest to the title of God, although in her eyes he was just an irresponsible puppy who made a prediction. But now she clearly realized that he was frightening, and she was literally risking her life, with the end of a sword right next to her chin. However, the most terrible thing for her was still the fact that Rayon loved Liliana, and that he died because he was distracted by protecting her, which was more terrible in her eyes. So she threw his sword away with her hand and said that he would be sorry if he killed her in a fit of anger. Pointing at herself, she added that she was the only one who could read his letter. The man raised an eyebrow and smirked slightly, saying it was funny. He repeated once again that if she lied, he would kill her, and she held onto her cloak with her hand. The girl replied that she understood this perfectly well and would not lie by pledging her life. The letter was left by Serena, but it had a curse on it, and it was to be read aloud in Korean, so it was clear that no one in this world could read it. In the novel, of course, Lillian broke the spell, but this is more important to her now, so she was ready to take this achievement away from her. Truth told Rukden that she was the only one who could break the spell on the letter, and if he killed her, he would lose the chance to read it forever, and it would remain an eternal mystery to him. He pulled this letter out of his sleeve and ordered her to read it right then and there. The girl took it from him and opened the envelope and calmly began to read it, saying that the letter was for Rukden, that the author herself had cast a spell on him, and that she knew he would not be able to read it, but she did. Then she stopped reading and said that she would read the rest of the letter only if he agreed to cooperate with her, and the letter was like magic. The man was outraged that she dared to threaten him. Truth looked at him slyly and sideways, saying that she was giving him a chance and that if he killed her, he would never lift the curse. He clenched his fists and asked her what she wanted, and when she raised her finger, she said that she wanted him to add something to his future prediction. She needed to bind Liliana and the crown prince by fate, because Rayon should not die in the hope of being with her. She told him out loud to tell him in the future that Liliana would become empress, and that if she did not, the empire would collapse. Even though it was a vile change to the future, he had to accept the terms. He looked at her angrily with clenched fists and said he would think about it. Truth was about to walk to the door and turned back to say that in the spring of 921, when his prediction would become known to the world, he would return here again. The heroine was about to open the door when she heard him ask her if she knew so much, and if she was such a powerful being, why couldn't she make this prediction herself, and why was she asking him to do it? However, Istina did not answer, but walked toward the exit with a smile, saying that they would meet again someday, leaving Rukdent in a bad mood. She and the knight were finally able to go outside, and the reason she gave him this task was because she was too busy trying to win Rayon. After walking a bit, she stopped breathlessly. Her heart almost stopped. Scandalizing in front of the most dangerous hero of the novel was not a very pleasant feeling. When she felt a little better, she asked the knight if he was interested in why she was doing all this. The man replied that he just had to support her, but she noticed that he usually refused her at first. The guy didn't say anything, and she remembered how many times he had tried to protect her today, and sincerely thanked him for it. He blushed a little and replied that he was just fulfilling his duties, and the girl was surprised by his expression and wanted to tease him some more. As they walked and the sun was setting in front of them, Istina said that she was worried about something, and he asked her what it was, and she said that she really wanted to see Rayon, and was thinking about visiting the Count. He replied that it was too late, and she could do it tomorrow. The heroine made cute eyes, and said that she really wanted to meet him now, and couldn't wait until tomorrow. Word replied that she shouldn't make such a face, and then she started threatening him again, and he had a very distressed look on his face. But the little girl was glowing and happily asked him if he knew what expression he was wearing, and smiled as he was about to die. Now she just had to wait for the prophecy from Rukden, and in the meantime she decided that she would take care of Rayon. The heroine exhaled heavily, and the maid asked if she was okay and if something had happened. She wanted to see the young man at other times, but Betty complained that because she is the daughter of a duke, she has many restrictions and stupid responsibilities, and asked the maid that maybe she should pretend to be crazy and follow the boy. The woman was nervous and did not answer, but simply told Istina to get up and go to breakfast. She was a little surprised at how much time had passed and hurried to make sure Betty didn't get mad at her again. When the girl was having breakfast, she noticed that everyone had some strange expressions on their faces. Her father and mother were looking at each other worriedly all the time, and the heroine did not understand the reason and was already starting to get a little nervous. They were behaving strangely, not realizing what they were doing. Her father spoke with grief and said that they wanted to have a party in honor of her birthday. She just asked about the party, and Count Oud was scared and ready for the worst. He shrugged and said that he knew she wouldn't like the idea, but there was a welcome party for aristocrats to be held before she was to be published the following year. The girl banged her fist on the table and said what she should have said earlier. Benzies was scared and started apologizing that it was really his fault, and started saying that they wouldn't do anything about it. Truth stood up from the table and glowed, and began to say happily that this was a great idea, and in general when she said she didn't like this kind of thing. Now she began to ask for this party. She really wanted it, and said she was born for it. Her eyes shone because if the aristocrats were to be there, it meant that the Count and Rayon would be there, and she was only too happy for that, and she hoped that he would come. Her parents were also very happy, hugging her and rejoicing that she had finally agreed and thanking her for it, and her mother was also incredibly happy to hug them. She was crushed, but she also said she was very happy about it. Then Benzis and Serendi began to quarrel about who was happier, and at that moment, Istina was thinking how good it was to be the daughter of a count. She ran joyfully to Rayon in a very beautiful dress. She wanted to hug him, but he moved away, and she rolled on the ground. Exhaling and raising one eyebrow, he asked what she had been up to since the morning. The girl continued to lie there, thinking that she just wanted to approach and start a dialogue, but she definitely failed in this. All bruised from the fall, she sat up smiling anyway and said that she was very happy to see him. He said a little angrily that she was just as strange even in the morning, but she agreed with a smile and added that she was completely out of it and how he could tell. Truth knew that he would not be happy, but she wanted to tell him in person. The heroine wondered if he was nervous, so she came closer and asked him what his favorite color was. She also answered that it was pink and waited for a response from the guy, who turned away from her and said that he didn't like any color of dress she wore. She clasped her hands to her chest and asked him enthusiastically how he knew she was choosing a dress. The boy replied that everything she does is pretty obvious, but he thought about it a bit. He added that if she liked pink, she should wear it. But the heroine blushed and replied that it was a special day for her, and she would like to wear the dress of the color he chose, and asked him to help her with the choice for once. And he still said that she would look good in snow white, that she should look good in white in general. Truth blushed, and was surprised because she was almost certain that he would choose some dark, gloomy color, although it could have been an insult to the type who thinks that any color will suit you. And if not, does she look like a snow fairy? Well, she dreamed that she did. But her dreams were quickly dashed when he said it was because her face was as pale as a white leaf. It was as if a stone had been thrown at her head, and she asked what it was supposed to mean. He turned around and left, insulting her again by asking her if she couldn't use her head or if she was wearing a hat instead, and left the upset girl alone. She was outraged that he wanted to say that she had no brain. Truth was depressed, but she quickly calmed down, thinking that she should be grateful that he had given her any advice at all. On the day of the party, she looked through the window at the many people who came to the celebration. Although this didn't really surprise the girl, after all, the Rasia family was one of the best in the entire empire, and it was their only daughter's birthday. He was the third best family, the family of the truth, and they had great fame which many could only envy. However, they also had their own skeletons in the closet, namely their own daughter, who had been abusing animals and people since childhood. And the more she did this, the closer she came to the point where she could no longer get away with it. She became the reason why the family was destroyed in the future. Before that, the girl had not fully understood the fame of her family, but when she looked out the window and saw the number of people, everything became clearer. She got goosebumps and sat down on her bed again. The girl flopped down on the bed. The thing she was most interested in from the whole celebration was to see Rayon. The guests were already having fun and eating, and the girl was asked to choose quickly. She was getting ready to go out, and she looked good. Her father came to tell her that she had to leave now, but he and Betty were both impressed by her appearance. She also had a whole list of guys who had applied to accompany her, and was looking at them carefully. She didn't want any attention from men she didn't know at all. She looked at her father and the maid, who were chatting happily among themselves, and they did not understand what she was feeling. So she packed up and told the Count and Betty that she would be back soon, and they should wait a little while. They tried to stop her and ask where she was going, but by then she had already run away. The truth wanted to be accompanied by Rayon and no one else. Because of this, she went around looking for him everywhere, but to no avail. She had almost lost hope of finding him, was disappointed and wondered where else he could be. Nevertheless, she did not plan to give up, so she decided to take off her shoes and continue looking for him barefoot because it would be easier. But before she could go any further, she heard a familiar voice asking what she was doing and froze for a moment. The girl turned around and saw him, Rayon. He shone so brightly in her eyes that she was blinded, so she closed her eyes. They stood silently and just looked at each other for a while. Truth held up the dress and asked if it was really him. The young man exhaled and asked her if she had already forgotten his face. The girl explained that she did not mean that and asked what he was holding in his hand and asked if he had come to apply to accompany her. He replied that she should know that this was not going to happen, and the Count simply asked her to hand over a small box. The girl was happy to say that it was an application for an escort. The young man asked her what she was listening to, but she had already hugged him while he was still in shock. Rayon blushed a little and said again that her behavior was rather tactless. She shouted a little at the beginning, almost asking him to say that he had come to apply. The girl kept hugging him, and he replied unhappily that he was sure there were plenty of people there without him, and she said she didn't need another. The guy replied a little nervously that if the Count saw them like that, he might misunderstand everything. but the girl didn't care. Saying that she was stubborn, he added that it would be better to let him go, and she did. She asked him again with sad eyes what was going on with the escort and whether he agreed. The guy exhaled heavily and replied that although he was not eager, he agreed. She was beaming with joy and had tears in her eyes, and she thanked him very much, saying that she was very grateful to him for that. She started waving her arms happily and said that they needed to go tell her father, and he wasn't happy, but he followed her. There were many people at the celebration, and the girl was thinking that even though she wanted no one but Rayon, but she was shaking and holding on to the bed frame because she was uncomfortable taking his hand, and he was looking at her judgmentally. That's why he asked her what she was doing in general. But when I asked her if she had forgotten how to stand on her feet, she blushed and stood up straight, denying everything and saying that something was wrong with her shoes. He listened to this and told her not to move, and she was surprised by this statement. He got down on one knee in front of the girl. She looked down at him and asked him in disbelief what he was going to do. The boy replied that he just wanted to put her shoes back on and gently put her foot back into the shoe. The girl blushed even more when she thought that he had touched her with his hand. He stood up with a slight smile and said that the girl had a strange expression on her face. She was red, but also somehow indignant, and she said that was not true. With a sly smile, he spoke again and said that her actions in everyday life were embarrassing and made her blush even more than this, and that she didn't realize it. She was still confused, but she realized that yes, he was telling the truth. But it was not quite the same. It was completely different for her than when she touched him. But he asked her how long she wanted to stay there and that she still had time to change her escort. And she quickly replied that she didn't want to change anything. Then he told her to take his hand as soon as possible and gave her his hand. He has been waiting for this for a long time to finally accompany the main character of tonight's show, Istina Drinophone Rasia. They held hands and walked down the stairs to the ballroom together. The guy thoughtfully added that if she fell, he would give her something to grab onto. She confidently replied that she would not fall and gently walked down holding the young man's hand. It all seemed strange to her. There were so many guests, but despite this, her eyes were only on Rayon and no one else. The girl realized that it was not a dream, but she had fallen in love with him again, which meant that she was lost, no matter how much she liked him. After her duties, she got tired and started talking to the guy, who found it difficult to say hello, and asked him how he managed to remember most of the names and faces. He replied that he was just not stupid, but the girl started to defend herself and asked who he was calling stupid. And then the topic changed and the girl was very close to him, offering him a drink because it was delicious. Suddenly, she heard her mother being addressed and looked in that direction, and Serendi asked what the holiday was in honor of. Many people whispered about whether their daughter was cured and did not care much whether they would be heard. They discussed how the son of a poor family became her escort in the first place, and that it was because of the Count, who was taking the boy everywhere, and because they had good relations with the Razy family, and that they were probably doing it all for money. The girl got very angry and started pacing, thinking that they had a rag for a mouth. However, the girl did not have time to go far because she was grabbed by a guy and looked back at him with a question. Rayon was in a bad mood, and he began to say that it looked as if Count Kim had nothing else but his son's beautiful face. But it didn't seem so, it was true. The boy said it himself, and asked if the Count should say it. Truth looked at him indignantly and told him not to say that, but the boy replied that everything they said was true. She shouted that this was not the case. He asked her to stop, because she didn't even realize that she was hurting him even more, and he looked at the ground, but the girl wanted to protest. Suddenly, Ron went somewhere and she followed him, and other people started looking at them. They went outside to the fountain and the girl started to speak hesitantly, saying that from now on, no matter what, she would always be on his side and support him. The guy looked back and asked her skeptically if she really thought he would believe her. With sad eyes, the girl replied that she didn't care whether he believed her or not, but that one day he would become the best swordsman on the continent and raise his family from its knees. She nervously replied that there was no malice or deception in her words, as well as no other deception, so he could believe her. Rayon smiled and asked what kind of nonsense was that. Truth saw him smile and wondered if she should tell him something else, namely what she had wanted to say to him since she had seen him today. She turned to him with her hands behind her back and wished him a happy birthday, because today was his holiday as well. He looked at her sadly and didn't say anything. She didn't understand why he had such a reaction, and she began to worry that she had mixed up the dates and it wasn't his birthday. The girl was confused and asked him if it wasn't his holiday and that she had checked and it was supposed to be today. He sadly replied that he did not, and that was fine. He just did not expect to receive a congratulation from her. She took his hands and told him that in the past she had been a terrible girlfriend, but now everything had changed, that she would greet him next year and the year after that, and that she would always greet him. She thanked him with a big smile for coming into this world. The young man blushed and said that he also congratulated her. She did not understand. But then he said again that he wished her a happy birthday. Her days of stalking continued after that. Their 12 years flew by quickly. Spring came. They were 13 years old, and an oracle appeared in the empire with the content she had long known and, most importantly, with the content she had personally added. Lillian was to become the wife of the crown prince, and their harmony would come with the goddess's blessing and save the empire from collapse. It's good that it was so clear that Lillian would be the prince's wife, but not complete. She sat in front of the mirrors, and also after that birthday party. But by now, there have been significant changes in their communication with Rayon. The Count duly accepted the invitation and came, of course, with Rayon, and they visited periodically and, most importantly, even when she hugged him very hard, he did not push her away anymore. He simply asked her to let him go. A couple of days before, she had been trying to hug him, but he pulled away while she was running towards him with all her might. She also fell hard and rolled to the ground. Because of this, she was very hurt and barked a little while the guy stood by, not knowing what to do, or it was a little bit wrong. The girl was waving and asking what they were going to do today and suggested reading, and he said she could do whatever she wanted. They came to a large library, and she saw that even when he was immersed in reading, he still looked beautiful, and she was ready to admire him every day. But he noticed her gaze and asked her to stop looking at him like that, and she was scared. Istina blushed and asked him how he knew she was watching, and he replied that it was hard not to notice her gaze. He went on to say that if she had time to look at him, maybe she should also learn the language of the races. It was the international language of the entire continent. The second language was chosen to study magic in an ancient language, which he needed to speak as his native language in order to live a normal life. She got a little angry and started to say that maybe she had studied so hard and decided to take a break, and that he was the one who wanted to go to the academy, not her. She continued that the exam is in the old language, and everything should work out if you keep looking at one book, and the guy asked with a smile if that was a question. He was beaming, and the girl wondered if he was just trying to make fun of her or something. She also wondered if the application process hadn't ended last year. Istina turned to the boy saying that the application process had already been completed, and the boy looked up at her. He said that even if he did, he had no reason to tell her about it. She suggested that they both go to the exam together. Rayon said he didn't want to, and she was a little offended and said he was cruel. The guy said he didn't want to take the easy way out, especially since if he went with her, she would attract a lot of attention. He needed to enter the academy to disappear from the Count's sight and become free. If the Count found out about his son's plan, he would immediately put him under surveillance. The girl exhaled heavily. Although she named the place where he was going to hell, she could still follow him. But if she ruined the guy's dream, it would be a completely different conversation. He suddenly asked what if. Tristina didn't understand what the guy was talking about and decided to ask him again, and he replied that he rarely sees her so calm. Holding up the book, she replied that there was nothing unusual about it. Rayon said that he would probably be fine on the road holding his head, and that he had told the Count that he would go for a walk with her. She asked him nicely if it was true, and he started asking why she was so happy. The girl took him by the shoulders and began to say that she was very happy and that they would definitely go for a walk. The Reborn interfered heavily in the life of her favorite character and thought that the plot would not change much. Truth and the Knight were on the street, and the girl asked him anxiously what he thought. The answer was that he thought the same way as her anyway. They both looked at the empty space where they had been practicing. Rayon hadn't shown up for practice today. It was the first time that something she didn't want to change had changed. The heroine thought that if he didn't come, something bad had happened, and wondered if the plot could have changed or time could have shifted after all. She seriously asked Reard how long it would take them to reach Count Rayon's estate, and he replied that at best it would take 2 days. The girl wanted to ask something else, something related to going there, but the man realized where this was going and said that there were stables not far away and that she should go with him. Istina was very concerned about whether the young man was okay. The girl recalled what happened in the novel when he came with the news that he had been admitted, so she abruptly opened the door to the mansion and shouted at the boy. In the story, a guy goes crazy and stabs a count who was about to commit suicide. She did not want to believe that it could have happened any faster and quickly ran inside. She came up and stopped Rayon, whose shirt was covered in blood, and he looked at her from under his forehead, noticing that it was her again. She said indignantly that she was ready to kill the count for him, and the young man replied that if she did not leave, he would kill her as well. She didn't want to go and didn't want to die, but he said that he would force the count to say goodbye to his life. The boy raised his sword and asked if she thought he would always be merciful to her. Truth put her hand on her heart and said that of course she didn't think so, but she still wanted to be close to him, and that he could ask and tell her anything he wanted, and she would try to help. That it was okay to believe and hope, so he had the right to do so, and she asked him not to think that he was alone, and that no one was with him. And that, as he said, she was very stubborn, so she would always be with him, even if he pushed her away. The young man did not believe her, saying that these were empty words that he did not want to hear anymore. She said it was normal, but she wanted to say it and came closer, wiping the blood from his cheek and hugging him tightly, saying it was very hard for him to be alone. By the time Rayon calmed down, Riard was able to save Count Rayon. And with Lucas's help, rumors spread around town that he had been attacked by a stranger, and people believed him. After this incident, the young man left his family home and moved in with Lucas, who did not mind at all. The heroine again wore a blue cloak and said that she was going to do good deeds. She came to Rukden's house and knocked, but quickly discovered that he was behind her. She asked if he had been waiting for her all along, and the man did not answer, but only told her to read the letter quickly. They didn't like each other very much, so they had lightning bolts in their eyes. She began to read a letter in which a girl wrote to her husband that because of the spell she had cast, he would not be able to read it himself, and she handed the letter to him with a smile, saying that the spell would break. After reading the letter, his eyes were wet. Then the girl said that now he knew she could be useful, and she would like to make another deal with him. He noticed that she was very confident and asked her what would happen if he didn't like it, and she replied that he could kill her and started whispering in his ear. The man thought for a while with his arms crossed, but agreed and said they would do it. She beamed and smiled and asked him to do so. Rukden had already realized that she had always done what she wanted, and she had already run out. Later, she handed Ron some flowers and told him to look at them. The young man asked her why she was showing them to him, but she took it seriously and said that they were just flowers, and he replied that they could be poisonous or cursed. She made a face and agreed with him, adding that there was an even more cruel and terrible spell than he thought. But if he didn't accept the flowers, then... Before she could finish, he interrupted her and told her to give them to him, and she was very surprised. Truth couldn't accept that he had accepted them so easily, and then she couldn't believe that he was holding them. In her eyes, he looked perfect. She blushed and drooled, which she quickly wiped away and said that she hadn't thought of anything strange. He just kept quiet, and then said that he hadn't asked her anything. In the language of flowers, eustoma means unchanging love. She knew that he shouldn't know the language, but she wanted to give them to him anyway, but soon began to doubt whether he really didn't. She began to walk around the room, thinking that it would be awkward if he knew, the guy meanwhile looking the other way from her. He looked at the flowers, thinking that flowers are very delicate and easily broken, and in the language of flowers it meant eternal love. The young man remembered that the previous Truth hated flowers and often insulted him, calling him dirty like them and also weak and disgusting to touch. Just from the smell of them, she complained of a headache and became even angrier and more violent, scolding him to make him go away. But now, holding them, she did not complain of a headache, but rather admired them with tenderness and gave them to him, and he did not understand how this could be possible. Everyone gathered around the Truth, parents with tears, and others more calmly. The girl did not understand why they were so sad. But seeing the support from them, she started to cry and felt sad. Betty asked with a smile if she would be bullied by other students at the academy. Knight Rider believed that she would be able to pass the exam and be admitted, but he was also concerned about the safety of the other students. The heroine was a little upset that they were both against her, but Rayon called her and asked if she had forgotten how to walk. It was early spring, and they were both 14 years old, but she was going to the academy with him. The eastern frontier was the driest territory in the German Empire, and it also had the largest academy. And it was the Academy of the Symphony of the Fringe, a truly majestic building. Upon entering, the girl's eyes shone and she was very excited to see it. The heroine was looking around happily because she had wanted to visit this place for a long time, but she heard a whisper in the background. People gossiped about her, asked why she was here and if it wasn't her hobby to torment people, and said that she even collected corpses. She was upset and shaking, not understanding why the rumors were so overblown and exaggerated. However, Rayon approached her and advised her not to interfere for no reason and not to aggravate her situation even further. There were also bad rumors about the guy, that he just had a pretty face, but the girl noticed that he didn't look like he was worried about it, and that was certainly good. She smiled, horrified in the direction where people were gossiping, saying that they were all just puppies. To her surprise, the exam began with a skill test, and only after passing it could the written part begin. Finally, it was Rayon's turn, and he was called to the table at number 95. He looked incredible, but the girl didn't understand how a living person could be so perfect, even if he became a munchkin. She happily watched him with her palms folded into a lock and rejoiced inside that she was able to be reborn. Suddenly, Rayon turned to her and asked why she was frozen, and she immediately came to her senses. He continued that he understood that her head was like a piece of jewelry, but he reminded her that she was next in line and had been called for quite some time. When she heard her 100th number being called, she quickly ran shouting that she was there, and he exhaled heavily. After the exam, she happily came over to ask how he was doing with them. But his expression made everything clear. It was glowing and said that she didn't need to ask, and he had passed with flying colors, even though he was unlucky, but he was so handsome. The girl looked at him a little depressed, but now he asked her how she did and what her grade was, and she blushed and asked him to be quiet. She thought she might die of anger, but he looked elegant and noble even now. Later, she stopped to calm down, thinking that she might indeed be sick. They went on to discuss that even though it was a dry area, there were a lot of people, and that it was simply because it was the outskirts of the academy. They watched a little longer, and the young man said that they had to go back a little bit while the girl was looking for something. Truth asked him to wait, and he looked at her asking what she wanted. The girl put a pink beret on his hair and was happy to see him, saying that she liked it and that he looked great. He stood there with this hairpin and asked her what made her so happy. She replied that they were just in such an incredible place and should have fun. The guy took it off and said he didn't like the way he was being treated, but she protested, saying he looked cute and it suited him. The young man said that he shouldn't have fun if he behaved like a girl, and that everyone has a different idea of fun. He added that hairpins and other similar accessories did not suit him. The girl exhaled and protested, saying that it suited him, but he remained silent. The guy hooked it into the girl's hair and said that he thought it suited her better, and she blushed a little. Or rather, she was red as a tomato and in a stupor, and the young man left saying that they had to find something to eat and find a hotel. The girl was surprised to hear about the hotel, but he explained that she was not calm now, and it would be difficult to go back to the city, and the sun was already setting. She blushed even more until the guy realized what was happening to her. He told her to get it right. Rayon exhaled and explained that they would have different rooms. But when they arrived at the hotel, they were told that it was exam time and only one room was available, and the hotel apologized for that. He wanted to go elsewhere, but the woman said that everyone had the same situation and nothing would change. The young man was a little angry, but Estina offered to spend the night here, and he asked if she was serious. They both started arguing that they didn't want to share a room with each other, but there was no other choice. And the woman just stood there smiling. She told the heroine that her brother was very shy, and it struck him like a lightning bolt. But she didn't stop and continued that they were a very nice brother and sister, and then Rayon flew away. So now he was sitting in a sad pose with his hands in his lap and looking at the floor, thinking about his life. Estina went to him, worried, and asked if he was okay because he hadn't said a word since then, and she wanted him to at least look at her. The girl realized that he was most likely like that because he was called a younger brother. He had a dark aura, but she had a plan, which was to ruffle his hair, and he was surprised by it. But when he asked what she was doing, the girl replied that she was making a wish for him to grow taller and told him not to worry, because he would grow in a moment. The guy looked at her skeptically and said that he couldn't believe that the Duke's daughter was doing this. But she replied that she had just stroked it and didn't understand what was wrong. He said that he did not, and asked if she needed to explain it to him as well, and she was indignant, not understanding what was wrong again. The young man said that if a boy and a girl share a room, it can look strange in the eyes of other people. The girl protested, saying that they were told they were cute like brother and sister. She looked down and said she didn't care at all. Rayon said that they had to get some rest to be on schedule tomorrow, and that he would sleep on the floor and she on the bed. She asked what he meant. The girl took him by the jacket and asked him to listen, but he immediately turned away, saying that he was refusing when she hadn't even had a chance to say anything. Her cheeks were red, and she was holding his hand, saying that they had a bed, and he shouldn't sleep on the floor and that they could just sleep together one night. The guy threw her hand away and said she was crazy, but she didn't give up and asked if he wasn't tired from the day and that she didn't think it would be comfortable for her to sleep alone, that it was scary to sleep in a new place, and that if he wanted to run away, she would follow him anyway, and that she was ready to run around the city all night to find him. She fell on the bed, flailing her arms. He thought about this proposal, but in the end he agreed, so now they were both lying down, he on his side and she on her back. The girl thought about how she had managed to persuade him, but he said that they had to go to bed because they had to return to the capital in the morning. She was struggling under the covers, unable to believe that she was lying in bed with him, and the guy looked at her unhappily. Suddenly, she spoke to the young man, thanking him for not running away today, and he replied that he had decided he could not leave her alone with the way she was behaving. Truth was happy, thinking about how wonderful he was, when suddenly she smelled a floral scent and opened her eyes. She liked the scent very much, and her mood began to improve. She started to fall asleep with a smile, mumbling to herself. Suddenly, Rayon spoke to her, and she quickly opened her eyes again. The girl apologized and said it was an accident. The scent was just very pleasant, and he didn't respond. But I told her that I had already thought about it. But she really liked flowers, and she laughed and confirmed that she liked flowers more than anything else in the world. He looked in front of him and asked if this meant that she no longer had headaches. The heroine looked at him in surprise and asked him what he was talking about. She hadn't heard anything about it, either here or in the novel. Thinking, she tried to remember something, but it seemed to her that Truth was not annoyed by anything in particular, and there was nothing about it in the novel. She didn't know what she was supposed to say. She began to run her fingers over the blanket and said that when she fell off the horse, she had many dreams, and there were many flowers there. These dreams helped her with her character, and she fell in love with flowers after that. After she told him her story, he asked her what kind of flowers she liked, and she confidently replied that she liked all of them. The young man smiled a little and agreed that dreams are a fantastic thing, even if they can correct inborn traits. He ended up telling her to go to bed, and she asked him why he was laughing, but he couldn't tell her a joke. It was already late at night, and he said he was already asleep, but he ignored her, and the girl argued some more and gave up, saying goodnight. The heroine was already wearing an academy uniform and was asked to move faster, and she was glowing with joy. The girl approached Rayon, saying that it was all very promising. She asked him his opinion about all this, and he was also wearing a new, stylish uniform. Today was the initiation ceremony that everyone had been waiting for. She had barely managed to pass the exam, and in a couple of months, Rayon had really grown. Now they were the same height. The girl was blushing and didn't know how to behave now. She decided to tell him this as well, and he looked at her with interest when she said they were the same height. The boy stepped forward and with a smile, happily said that now he would not look like her younger brother. Truth was surprised that he still remembered the words of that woman from the hotel. The girl patted him on the shoulder, thinking it was very sweet, while he looked at her questioningly and asked if he was still worried about it. He didn't comment, but the girl changed the subject to the fact that she had heard that new students were given a chaperone, and just then a guy who introduced himself as a grandmaster and was in his 3rd year of fencing approached them. Truth greeted him joyfully while Rayon remained silent, so she pushed him, and he was reluctant to introduce himself as well. Everyone was pleased to meet each other, so their escort decided to give them a tour and introduce them to the academy. The last element of this tour was the dormitory, and he explained that there are separate dormitories for women and men. The girl was already upset, realizing that in order to see Rayon, she would have to secretly sneak in to see him. But the guy added to her chagrin that the other sex was not allowed to enter the dormitory. He said that if they were caught, they could be given penalty points or even expelled from the academy, so they had to be careful. The heroine was very upset by this news. So, in the end, the guy said that classes would start tomorrow and that today they should go around and look around and get settled. Istina thanked him for explaining everything to them, but Rayon did not comment. He was immediately going to go to the dormitory, but she stopped him by asking when he planned to leave. She received a rude answer that he did not plan to leave while she was waiting for him. The girl got angry and asked him if he thought he was overdoing it, but he said that he would come out when he had to go out to eat and only then. She was upset and pouted, thinking that she too would go unpack. After a while, the girl, pleased with herself, unpacked all her belongings from her suitcases. She was glad that she had made Rayon's promise and now wanted to fulfill the second point of her plan when she entered the academy, namely to meet the thief who had tormented Lillian Teresa, but she hadn't expected this. A golden-haired guy greeted her and said he was glad to meet her, and this young man was also the unrequited love of the thief. Moses Almakas stood in front of her, and she did not understand the reason for this. He was one of 4 characters in Lillian's harem. He was a brilliant magician, intelligent, and later became the chancellor of the empire. The boy was glowing, and the girl did not understand what was happening, because in the original he had never met the truth. Moses blushed a little and asked if he could tell her something. She was a little frightened by this innovation. He had a bouquet in his hands and looked at her and said that he liked her and that he fell in love at first sight. The truth was so blue she was shocked, hoping that she had just cleaned the bad guy's ears and was imagining things. She closed her eyes, unprepared for such a rapid development of the plot, and replied that he was overdoing it with his jokes. The guy was very upset that she felt sorry for him. He said it was a pity if she took it as a joke. But she added that they had never seen each other or even spoken before. He said with burning cheeks that he had always known about her. The heroine chose a strategy of intimidation and decided to scare him by saying that if he knew her, he should know that if she was bored, she could fight and dig all day, feed people frogs or add poison to their food. The young man smiled sweetly and said that he knew that too. The girl was surprised and upset by this turn of events, and that even knowing this, he was still in love with her. In the novel, he was a hypocrite, so maybe he is making secret, dark plans in his heart. But looking at his face, you can't say that about him. He has such a sweet expression and not even a bit of shyness. Moses shone so brightly that he blinded the girl's eyes. She coughed a little and replied that she was grateful for his feelings, but she was already in love with someone else, and he said he knew that too. But when he asked if she meant Sir Rayon, the girl was shocked and redder than before. The guy kept his hands behind his back and asked her not to reject him right away, saying that he just wanted to confess his affection for her today, and since she was rarely alone, he decided to take this chance. She replied that she had no one but Rayon, and a dark aura appeared around the guy. Now he was crying, and the girl didn't understand why. So she decided to ask him directly why he suddenly cried, and he replied that he hadn't even noticed. The blonde apologized and said that he had been holding back his emotions to meet her, but it just happened. And since she kept rejecting him, it didn't help the situation. She looked at him, not really believing him, and remembered his description from the novel, where he was described as a master of his work and passionless, but he was not experienced in love at all. So Lillian wanted to caress him, and that's why he became interested in her. But our protagonist was not interested in creating a harem and had no such dreams, so she looked at him sternly. She realized that if she started to console him, she would give him vain hope, so she simply asked him to stop crying. He sadly said that she was a heartless person, but she replied that nothing could be changed because there was no way she could like him. The boyfriend noticed that she was very confident in her words, so she agreed and said that if not Rayon, then no one else. She liked him, but she had never thought about a future without him, and at that moment, lightning passed through her. The heroine realized that during all this time she had never told him that she liked him, so she said goodbye to Moses and said that she had to run on business and apologized. He gave her a look and stared up at the sky. The girl ran to the dining room, remembering that he said he would come out when he went to eat, which meant he had to be not far away. When she saw his back, she ran to him with all her might. She shouted his name to make him turn around and wait, and when she reached him, she began to breathe heavily, holding her knees, and he asked what was wrong with her. He said that the girl had said she would rest in her room, so he asked her what she had already done during this time. After normalizing her breathing, the girl nervously said that she had to tell him something. The guy looked at her without trust and asked her what she wanted to tell him, and that she should just tell him. She wondered how a girl could have remembered it so quickly, and how it happened that she had never told him. She wanted to be with him so much, she addressed him by his name. She blushed and said that she liked him. Rayon was clearly not expecting this and froze in shock while she looked at him, waiting for an answer. He wanted to start talking again about how a person like her, but the truth interrupted him. She said that she really, really liked him. The young man asked her to stop and turned away from her. He wanted to walk away, but the girl called him back. The heroine followed him and asked him why he was like this and wanted to stop him from leaving. The young man turned around, and as it turned out, he was covered in blush. She was interested in his expression and couldn't believe that he was really ashamed. So she turned to him again, but his back was already turned to her. The girl kept asking him if he was okay, but he kept silent and hid his face. But later, Truth finally managed to catch his red face. But he asked her to stop, because this behavior was not the most pleasant, and asked if she didn't know about shyness. The girl smiled and shone, not knowing what to do, and replied that she did not know about it at all. But I kept holding his cheeks, thinking about how it was possible not to love him. After that, she hugged him and said that she loved him more than anyone in the world. Truth had a purpose and did not plan to give up, even if he grumbled all his life, and she gave him sweet speeches so that he would not regret anything.